Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Approaching the Pros, a college football production focused on different college players from before they ever take a college snap all the way through their journeys as they try to approach the pros themselves. I'm your host, Andrew Woodruff. You can find me on Twitter just by searching @_Davy Scouts. Now, since it's time to move on from the running backs like I talked about last episode, I decided to take this time to focus on a position which there's a very clear edge that can be gained after the top few studs at the pro level. That's right. Today's episode is going to be looking at identifying the best high school tight ends before they ever play a snap of college football. And since this isn't everyone's favorite position, as a special, my goodness, bonus of seeing some of my work on the college career football tracker that I was talking about before. So, with that, as always, let me start out with the outline. I've got 279 tight ends in my high school model, dating all the way back to 2013 historically. But of course, most of my bigger classes start coming up in these later years. This way, we can start applying it to the 2024 class and to future classes down the road. So, with that, as always, let's talk about the process first. So, the process for tight ends is broken down into three main parts. Of course, the recruiting aspect makes up 25% of their scores for high school. This really acts as my film grade because, again, these are scouts that go out there and look at these players. They're paid to do this. And so it's much better than me taking the time and trying to look through 279 huddle films, if I can even find one, and trying to accurately describe it myself. I trust the people to do their best and give me a adequate film grade. And so again, for that purpose, we look at the recruiting stars, the composite scores, and I go ahead and take in the conference. I don't really care about what team, but I do at least consider the conference as I assign some points toward their high school score. Now, my high school stats, want to look over there, obviously kind of self-explanatory, right? I look at the stats, their high school career on a per game level based on what I call the stud theory, which I'll get into in the next slide. So just stick with me. And of course, again, we're trying to play college football, trying to predict future fantasy football stars. And so there has to be a fantasy aspect tied into this as well. And so the fantasy aspect, obviously, fantasy football in itself is based off their high school stats. And so that's why you see that these two things are connected. It's shaped in a way to where also it plays along with what I'm going to call the positional recruit types, which for tight ends, I'll get into that after I talk about the stud theory. And so let's talk about that. So for the stud theory, the easy way to think about this is again, our NFL studs, the dudes at the top of each position that we think about, were most likely studs in college. And so the way I can apply this theory for my high school models is I take the same process and I push it back one more level. Our NFL studs were most likely studs at the college level and at the high school level. And so my assumption, if I look at this correctly, I should see stats on a per game level for their career in high school reflect that they're outperforming other peers at the same position. Now, again, I think that's an easy process to go with this. And we then apply this into what we call the recruit types. So for running backs, it was really based off their size. For tight ends, I'm really looking for just how athletic they could be. And so their recruit types are based off of some of the high school stats I see. And I break it down to five different categories. So again, whereas recruits for running backs was based off the size and it was feature, role player, and satellite backs, there's five categories for tight ends. And at the top, of course, we've got your playmaker, super great with the ball in his hands. The athlete, not really far behind. So we really love those top two categories. Third, you have the utility guy. So like he can be useful, but it might be a little bit more scheme dependent. Maybe not so much himself. So right, you're looking for the right situation. Limited, not a great spot to be in, but there is some situations where I'll talk about why a player, as I go through this, might be considered that. And again, what we call the unknown category. I couldn't find anything on this kid when it came to stats, or maybe they were out of the country and they're now just coming into the States and playing football for the first time. And so they've got to get somewhere. So I just put them as an unknown. Now, with that, I figured let's go ahead and let's talk about these recruit types. So for playmakers, I can't put every single player for each category on here. So for my playmakers, I really just kind of took some of the top dudes I could find. Really looked a lot more at who was already drafted since I had that broken down. Who does have draft capital already? And so we got guys like Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, Mayer, Njoku, Ingram, Dolchich, Pat Fryermuth. Like a lot of these dudes that we like up at the top have been the same dudes that we said, okay, these dudes are pretty athletic with the ball in their hands. Like these are the dudes we want. Well, that the high school stats backed it up. They fell into the right category. They're labeled as playmakers. Now, that always doesn't reflect their recruit scores. So, for example, Dalton Kincaid, even as a playmaker, was still a 66 on the recruit score. However, on the opposite end, you got Brock Bowers, who was a playmaker, has my highest score ever in the scale of 1 to 100, and he has a 98. So, I mean, great things all around. For the athletes, you still got guys like Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson. It gets a little bit shorter after that, but you got JT Sanders, Hunter Long, Ben Snotts, who just got drafted this year, Irv Smith Jr., Cole Kmet, Isaiah Likely, Brevin Jordan. And now, again, I know some people can look at this, well, so and so ran such time in the NFL Combine. Well, we got to think about this. These recruit types are based off what they were doing in high school. I don't take the time to go in there and figure out, did they play at a 6A school in Texas or did they play at a 1A school in Maine? I just base it off the stats I see. And so we could see some of these guys change every time as we get more and more updated numbers. Typically, there you'll see in the college tracker, which I'll share just a little bit, those numbers will start to fix themselves over time. So after athletes, I talked about being a utility guy. You still see someone like Noah Fant up here at the top. Trey McKitty, Jared Wiley, Eric All. Some other guys have been drafted in the past couple of drafts. Peyton Hendershot, Austin Stogner, who was fan favorites for some people. Colston Loveland, Brant Keithy, both two guys college level right now that fall into this category. Bryson Nesbitt, right? We're seeing a lot less of these NFL studs that we like to see, and just a lot more questionable names, right? And I'm not even going through and reading all this, but again, the list gets a lot smaller if you're a utility guy. Now, for the last two, I don't have a lot of either of this category. And so they ended up going into one of these two tiers. So, for example, the limited tier, you have Tucker Kraft at the top, Josh Wiley, Tommy Trimble, Dalton Keene, AJ Barner, Mason Fairchild, Isaac Rex, right? Some of these names right there. For example, let's take Tucker Kraft. I talked about there's certain cases where the player's going to get put in this category. Tucker Kraft, I believe, again, if I remember the right name off the top of my head, played quarterback in high school. It's really hard to look good in a tight end model if you're not playing the right position, especially one that doesn't involve any receiving for the most part. Like, he's going to be considered limited. It didn't help also that his recruiting profile was super low, but that's what the college career tracker is for, is to help us catch that and possibly fix it down the road. For the unknowns, again, for a variety of reasons, either I couldn't find any stats on these kids, they were in circumstances where they didn't have any. Like, they got to go somewhere. And so, again, some of these top guys, we get Dawson Knox, Theo Johnson, Chig, the Tennessee tight end, Yasmin, Westover. I mean, just guys like that. They're unknown. We really don't want to be in these bottom two categories. But again, it's not a lost process. Like, we do see some of these names right here, and we're like, oh, okay, well, they did have some NFL relevance. You're just starting really behind the eight ball on trying to play catch up. And so let's look in a different light. Let's go ahead and let's take by class approach. So remember I talked about the older classes, I really went back and just picked a few of the top dudes, or I looked, hey, who had draft capital or who was at the very top of that recruit class, and I went ahead and plugged them in. What was the recruit type and what did their score come out to be? And so let's take 2013 Evan Ingram. Really was I just wanted to get his name in there and see what it thought. He was a very lower ranked prospect. I believe he was even a receiver out of the side of the top 100 or just super low. But his stats showed, hey, he has playmaker potential, but the score only showed a 44. That's okay. It will fix itself in a second. But again, it was just a risky process for me to tell you back in 2013, hey, take Evan Ingram over here, who's changing positions. And yeah, it'll definitely work out 3, 4 years down the road for you if you're looking for an NFL stud. Can't say that in year one, but it gives me a starting point to plug into the college tracker. 2014, I only took a couple guys. Mark Andrews, I definitely wanted in this model. Plugged in his high school stats and it blew it away. Not only was he a playmaker, he had a 96% score, which is one of the top scores there is, technically tied for second. David Njoku was also a playmaker, but he was down to 79. Three Schultz in there because he's had a little bit of NFL relevance the past couple years. It labeled him as an athlete, but it really showed, hey, his high school production does not look great, so he was down to 39 to start with. 2015, the top dude up here, because I've got it sorted by scores if you're watching this, was only an 82. It doesn't get any better, and honestly, if we look through this list, nobody's really standing out. Maybe Chase Sternberger, who was labeled an athlete with a 35% score, but again, didn't really come to fruition when it came to the NFL level. Foster Moreau, an athlete, 32%. Josh Oliver, Dawson Knox, Donald Parham, like all of these guys were just super low in the model as high schoolers. So when it comes to taking a freshman tight end before they ever played a snap, I wouldn't really be telling you to take anyone out of these three classes besides Mark Andrews. If you're a 96% chance coming into college, that's a really good look for the tight end. Well, let's move over to 2016. A couple of dudes that we know in this class. TJ Hawkinson was a 3-star tight end going to Iowa. And don't worry, this model has no bias based off school. So there's not any extra points going to Iowa because we can look in the same draft. Noah Fant was able to utility player with a 68% score. TJ Hawkinson hits that really magic number for me, 90 plus with a 91. Noah Fant all the way down to 68. Again, there's no Georgia bias, there's no Penn State bias, there's no Utah bias. Like it grades it as is based off the conference and what the player is and the recruiting services and what their high school stats showed. And a lot of power goes to these stats for tight ends. There was 2 other 90s in this group, Stephen Sullivan, Octavius Cooley, both hit 90s. Obviously, we know they didn't work out, but that's okay. Like the very top dude was some 3-star way down the list, and we really liked what he's done for us when it comes to fantasy teams. Let's look over at the next one. For the 2017 class, the best dude in here was an 85, Hunter Bryant. It would have been a really good year for you not to be wasting your draft picks too early. Maybe in C2C you can take some of these dudes late, but don't waste them too early on some of these dudes because 85 on a freshman tight end is still a pretty risky category. There's some upside. Grant Calcaterra and Hunter Bryant, both with 85s. They did have some production in college, so that kind of worked out. Charlie Kohler, 84, but after that kind of drops. The next one, Cade Otton, 79, Jake Ferguson, 73, Peyton Hendershot, 71, Cole Kmet, 70. After that, yeah, the next real interesting names, Isaiah Likely, who I don't know anybody who would have told you you got to take that freshman tight end going to Coastal Carolina because he's going to work out in the long run. Not yet. It's a little too early, right? you can be strategic when it comes to tight ends and still jump in before anyone knows who is who. Well, move on. 2018. So this is where I get my really first big class. And so up at the top, you've got Jeremy Ruckert and Castles, both with 89s in this class. Will Mallory with an 87. Kyle Pitts with an 86. Now, to be fair, Kyle Pitts was like a top 5 tight end in the class. Mine just has him as a 4. Tied for 4, really, if you look at it, with Dallin Holker. So, again, you're not getting a lot of wiggle room on him, but it's helpful because it had guys like Brevin Jordan above him in the system. My model said, hey, something's off with that. He's only a 53. Right. There's another one up here. If I can remember his name real quick. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was also ranked above Kyle Pitts. The model saying, hey, careful, this dude might not deserve to be as high as he is. Zach Kuntz, I do remember he was tight end 4, right above Kyle Pitts. He has him at 78, right? So there's a little bit of a drop off. You might have played a small advantage to get Kyle Pitts before Kyle Pitts took off. And there's only, I believe, Rutgers was the only one that was actually ahead of Kyle Pitts that the model still says to keep ahead of him. Now, again, the same class, I did go ahead and plug in Trey McBride, Pat Fryermuth, 2 guys that ended up at 70 and 66 respectively. Right, so I'm not saying rush to the board to pick this dude up, but we're going to see, again, as the system updates a little bit with more information, we see where it starts picking up with that. 2019, not big class. I really just focused in more on the top still. I went and found Laporta, plugged in his information. They did a great job those 2 years with Iowa when it came to Hawkinson and then replacing him with Laporta, because Laporta, even as a 3-star, was labeled as a playmaker based off his stats. And based off all of that together, his score came out to a 92%. And again, I'm going to keep telling you, anything 90 or above is a great spot to be in. I'm willing to probably go as low as 85, but 90 and above is a very special group and a very small select group. Hudson Henry was the only other one that went to 86. Everybody else was kind of left low. So it would have been a good year to tell you, hey, don't be wasting your picks on Austin Stogner super high. Don't waste it on Baylor Cup super high. Those are 2 names I do remember that was way up there in the recruit ranks. There was easily issues in both of their games. 2020, Eric Gilbert was a 5-star for a reason. He had a 95 in my system. Unfortunately, the choices he made kept that from going anywhere. After him, I did plug in G. Scott Jr. just because we know later on he transferred positions over to tight end. Obviously, as a receiver in high school and a very highly ranked receiver in high school, he was going to do pretty well as an 88 in this system, but probably not the best then if you think about it, because I don't have any deduction when it comes to weight at tight end. And his scores still weren't as good as the top. That's all I'll say on that. Moving on. Jalen Conyers, 88. Luke Lachey, 85. Michael Mayer, 79. He also was a 5-star, but again, his production didn't quite match the recruiting services, the recruit type. And again, if the high school stats and fantasy points don't quite match up, it does push down a little bit. He does push it back to where it kind of ends up being correct a little bit later. But again, as a freshman, my model probably would have said, hey, let's not take too early a pick on that. And that'll be up to you what you thought ultimately. Was that a good idea? Was that a bad idea? 2021, again, I mentioned Bowers earlier having 98, top score so far in my high school model. It's going to be really hard to top that with a 99 or a 100. I will definitely be letting people know if somebody does hit that high. Again, there's some candidates out there and keep an eye on, but right now, probably not going to happen. After him, there's obviously a very big drop off. So while Bowers was number 2 that year in the ranks, I believe Thomas Fedone, the Nebraska kid, was the number 1. He's all the way down here at 76. It would have been a very easy, hey, don't go for Nebraska's student right here, go for Georgia student. It's looks like a very drastic difference in skills. Again, it's hard to tell about Thomas because he had some injuries, but the model at least would have maybe pointed you in that direction. Terrence Ferguson was an 86. Lewis Hanson was an 86. I believe he was a Michigan tight end. JT Sanders was not only was he labeled a recruit athlete, but he was also a recruit type athlete. It was an 80, along with Clemson's Jake Brenningstool as an 80 playmaker. So again, there were some dudes to know up here at the top, but for the most part, it was telling you the rest of them can wait, right? Don't be overreaching for anybody here, and just be aware maybe these guys aren't quite as promising as we thought they were. 2022, kind of similar. There's no 90 plus candidate here. Oscar Delp ended up being the best one at 89. Colston Loveland was an 88, who currently sounds like everybody's favorite tight end to bet on for the top tight end in next year's draft in 2025. Right behind those two, a little bit lower, 84 is Arlie Sportingham as a playmaker over at Florida, and Jake Johnson, playmaker, 82. Right, so not a lot of options here. Would have been a very good year to say probably don't buy in year 1, but watch these students, maybe some guys like Jack Velling, Justin Jolly, they'll start pushing their way up to, okay, it's worth taking these dudes. 2023, Pierce Sperlin, the third, was the other person I was referring to that had a tied score of 96 as a model. It's very disappointing to find out that he unfortunately has to end his college career and his playing career as of today based off medical conditions. But the model said he had a very promising future if things had worked out. Right behind him in last year's draft that nobody was taking was Ben Brahmer or Benjamin Brahmer over at Iowa State at an 86 as a playmaker. Joey Schaffler, 83 as a playmaker, should be the Penn State crowded room. I don't have Tyler Warren currently in the system. He's a name I'll add later. But Schaffler did take this first year, didn't do anything, just had a red shirts in the background, learn at a very prestigious program how to play the position and be the best he could. So he could be a candidate this year that we need to be watching, right? Everybody else is kind of really just, hey, probably don't overreach on this, right? Andrew Rappelier, that's one at 51. Lawson Lucky is another at 50. Now, I would have probably been wrong. Luke Haas at 49, but we've only seen a 5-game sample from him, and it's very promising. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So let's talk about the 2024 class. Again, if there's anything to take away from this, 90 plus in my model is very special. It's very difficult. If you're going to be worth my time investing as a freshman tight end, you've got to meet very high criteria. And so let's talk about this. Up here at the top, you got Christian Bentancur, Clemson's tight end, who was labeled as an athlete with a 93% score. That's higher than TJ Hawkinson. That's higher than Sam Laporta. That's way on up there into some very rare groups. I'll show you a side by side about that in just a second. After him, you've got Corey Duff Jr. He was a tight end, but Rutgers apparently has labeled him as a receiver. So that's going to be a little disappointing if he does swap positions. He was going to be a 91 as a playmaker. Carter Nelson, playmaker going to Nebraska, was labeled as a 90. And that's my top 3 dudes right there. So if Duff is going to be playing receiver, I'll start not talking about him right now unless we see something change. But that means Christian Bentancur and Carter Nelson, my top 2 dudes when it comes to this draft class. They are typically not the top 2 dudes taken on any draft. And so there might be a way to get some value out of this by getting them a little bit later over some of the other dudes that people are taking. After them, you got Luke Reynolds again, right there at an 89 as an athlete. So again, he's in a promising group. I said I'd be willing to go down as far as 85. The 2024 class has several options because right after Reynolds, you've got Jimmy Trimble going over to Syracuse is in the playmaker type with an 88. Trades Green, LSU, tight end, again, playmaker category with an 87. Tied with him is also 87 playmaker, Jaden Riddell going to Georgia, a very popular name if you go to the C2C group. Derek DeGroff, I kind of think this one's interesting because circumstances. Washington really just lost everybody, and DeGroff has come in as an 86 in my score. Was a spring early enrollee, and actually by before spring practices was over, had started working in, repping in with the first team offense. He might be that sleeper guy that we're talking about next year. Is why didn't we see this coming? The situation's lining up pretty well. And again, there's two 85s here. Roger, and I'm not going to mispronounce his last name. I believe I can't remember where he's actually going, but he has an 85. Keelan Smith also with an 85. I believe Keelan Smith was the other Nebraska tight end that they took this year. And right below them, this is where it starts dropping a little bit. 82, Caleb Odom going to Alabama. Again, I'm not going to really refer to him much moving forward since Alabama's already also marked him as a receiver. So after that, again, just be aware because, again, you got Brady Prescorn who's going to Michigan all the way down into 69. You got Landon Thomas, I believe, going to Florida State. I've seen his name hyped a little bit down at a 50. And so, like, just there's risk here. And some of these names at the top, when it comes to the 2024 class, looks like they might could be a value for you if you're playing it right. Now, me, I really wanted to bet on my model, so I even went into a Debbie league. My last pick, I took Christian Bentaker just because, again, this is a very rare group. And again, I'll get there in a second, but let's look first, real quick, just based off stars. So I already talked about most of these players. There's only a couple of 5 stars when it came to tight ends. Gilbert was the only one that was in the 90s. JT Sanders was an 80. Michael Mayer was a 79. Darnell Washington was a 49. Isaac Nada was a 38. Not like it just shows just because you're a 5 star, that's not enough to push your score up if you can't produce at the high school level. And yes, not every high school system is set up to feature tight ends. So especially maybe these older tight ends, you could argue, oh well, such and such doesn't do it like this. We didn't run that type of scheme. I have to have some historic context to weigh against the present and the future prospects. And so they're not hitting certain numbers that seem to be really strong correlations here. 4 stars. Again, some of the top names up here, won't say them all, but you got Bowers, you got Andrews, you got Bentacure, I'm hoping, You got Oscar Delp near the top, Colson Loveland. Kyle Pitts is still 86 in the system. So, I mean, some of the names that we really want are still up here near the top. 3 stars. Again, I use this just kind of show 3 stars can still show up when it comes to my model. Laporta and Hawkinson both being 90 plus, right? DeGroff, who I was just talking about, is a 3 star going to Washington. Excuse me, was an 86. Ben Brahmer, probably my favorite second-year tight end, was also showing up as an 86. Luke Lachey, who everyone's talking about as this other contested option between him and Loveland, who's going to be tight end 1 of the 2025 class, was at an 85, right? And so it still looks like it's pushing some of the names we like near the top. And of course, again, Trey McBride is down there, Noah Fant's down there. But let's look at this. Real quick, my 2 stars, 1 star, 0 stars, even they have a chance to show up in my system. And so kind of like when I was talking about with running backs, the the lower stars, still really rare seeing them in the 40s. That seems to be significant. My tight ends, it looks like anything at least in the 50s or above could be promising for these players since, again, recruiting services are very out on them, which typically means their production's also super low. Just let's talk through these players. Justin Jolly all the way up at a 77. Alec Holler, 75. Dalton Kincaid, we like seeing this as a 66 playmaker. That's clutch. Isaiah Likely, athlete as a 61. Andrew Ogletree didn't really work out, but he was an athlete at 61. Lucas Kroll, athlete at 60. Denver apparently likes him a little bit. Greg Dolchich right below him at a playmaker as a 57. Ben Sonat, athlete, 56. Harold Fannin Jr., athlete, 52. Big drop off. Everybody else after that's below 30. And besides Tucker Kraft down here at the bottom, which had a unique circumstance, none of these others are really just blowing anybody away. Now, again, kept talking about, hey, it's rare to be 90 plus. This is what I'm talking about. Let's look up here at the top. We're talking about Brock Bowers, Pierce Sperlin, Mark Andrews, Gilbert, Ben Secure, Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, skipping one because he's a receiver apparently, Stephen Sullivan, Carter Nelson, Octavius Cooley. Out of 279 tight ends in my model, if you don't account for the one that's possibly playing receiver, we're talking about only 10 players hit 90 plus. You've got to be strict when it comes to tight ends because we know they are very low hit rates if you don't consider that. But it looks really promising for these three 2024 kids who are supposed to be playing tight end. So when it comes to Bentiker, Carter Nelson, Luke Reynolds, they're in a very good class with Bowers, Andrews, Laporta, Hawkinson. Gilbert probably would have been a hit, but that's on him. Sperlin, we don't know what would happen. So really, we're talking about Stephen Sullivan didn't work out. Octavius Cooley didn't work out for sure. I mean, if I could tell you there's a chance that one of these dudes could be Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, Andrews, or Bowers, people are going to lose their minds. But that's the group upside that they have. Again, the 80s, because again, I just took the top dudes all the way through 86 in the model. We're still seeing Delp, who's getting talked about, Loveland, who's getting talked about. Who else we got? Mallory, and not really getting talked about. Dan Brommer, I'm making sure everybody's listening about that. Kyle Pitts. Right, there's still some names up here near the top. And that's really good to see. But again, that 90 plus is the one I'm going to keep harping on. These three dudes near the top, people need to be at least aware of what upside they may possess. And so, again, being tight ends, if you're willing to listen to me and watch it through this long, I want it to be nice and share what I was talking about. So I talked about the models don't stop when they're high schoolers. So what I do is I take their recruit type, which doesn't have any weight after their recruit year, and their recruit score, and then I start seeing how do their careers literally track as they go through college. And so what I do is I take each year. So for example, let's just say up here, Brock Bowers, I take his recruit score of 98. Since he plays in his first year, I take a percentage of his old score, and then I look at 5 metrics when it comes to tight ends. I say, how did Brock Bowers do in these 5 metrics in his first year? Now, obviously, first year for tight ends to me don't hold a lot of weight because this is probably the hardest position, along with quarterback, to really crack into the starting rotation and be a stud or the dude of an offense. Bowers is a unicorn, obviously, but for most of them, we're not seeing those year one dudes just come out and light up the world on fire. So the weight of each tier isn't super high, but they can go up and down a little bit that first year. If they don't play, for example, let's look at Hawkinson. Start off with a 91. You see his year 2 score going into his second year of college, still at a 91. I do not hold red shirts against tight ends. It's not like the running back year 1 0 theory I talked about. It's not like the year 1 0 theory not me, Campus of Canton, shout out to them, did with their receivers. Tight ends it's okay if they don't play that first year. It's okay if they don't have stats that first year. But again, it matters. Now, from year 2 to year 3, basically repeat the same process I just said. However, I'm more strict. By year 2, there's got to be some production, and it needs to be kind of a relevant production of these 5 categories that I look at. Now, I'm not going to share what exactly they are, but they're just, again, 5 stats that I've noticed. It seems like there's a correlation when it comes to determining which tight ends work out the best. And I break down each of the metrics I look at into different tiers. As each year expands, I open up more tiers within each metric to put them into different categories to earn different amounts of points. Obviously, the better you do in the tiers, the more points you get near the top. And that works into the year 3 score. By year 4 score, I'm expecting even more. So again, I take less of the previous score and now require higher standards of production. And we keep working it all the way through. Now, notice it says recruit score, year 2 score, year 3 score, year 4 score. So that means going into freshman year, going into sophomore year, going into junior year. If they decide to play senior year, then they can get a senior year score. Otherwise, it stops after that because, again, that becomes their final score if they decide to declare early. So you might see some of these names, for example, Brock Bowers, his year 4 score was a 101. His final college score is also a 101. Any production after their senior year gets just lumped into this last category because I've got to cut it off somewhere to their final college score. So even if they play 5 years, 6 years in college, at that point, it gets their career stats based off into a final college score at the end of their career. And so I may have to update some of these after a year for future prospects who maybe stay that extra year. But even with tight ends, we don't see that too often. We take these final college score, I plug in their overall draft capital. So whether they went 4th like Kyle Pitts, whether they went 147th like Brevin Jordan, like wherever they are in the draft, I give them a number for where they got picked. If they don't get picked, they have just an arbitrary number after that, just so I can separate it, and they can earn some points based off draft capital. And that gives us what we have as our final NFL rookie grade. So going into the rookie draft or into your rookie year, they get this final rookie grade. And notice again, the model does a really good job of shuffling out who deserves to be at the top. And so let's look at my top names based off, again, this is in the order of the final NFL rookie grade. You got Bowers at the top, McBride, Laporta, Pitts, Hawkinson, Kincaid, Andrews. Like those 7 dudes were some of the main dudes that we like seeing in the NFL for any fantasy purposes. When you talk about those first couple that I named off, Hawkinson, Pitts, Laporta, McBride, Bowers, those were all the names who were 95 plus. Now, Kincaid still ended up with a 93. Andrews with a 92. Mayer was the only one that hit in the 90s with an 81. After Mayer, it gets a little lower. You got David Njoku, who falls down to an 86. Noah Fant at an 86. Evan Ingram at an 84. Greg Dulcich at an 84. Pat Fryermuth at an 81. And that's it. Like, notice, so out of 80 plus percent, that's a very select group to fall into, which is good for us because, again, tight ends is a really hard position. So we can be very, very select about just how much points you can earn. And so, again, let's notice, like, for example, Trey McBride. I'd said he started off as 70, and that's okay. Doesn't really play a lot in year 1. He still stays basically a 70. He was a 70.4 going into his sophomore year. Plays a little bit more there. As a sophomore, gets pumped up to a 71.75. Well, okay, hey, you've had 2 years in college. I'm really going to start holding your previous score against you and lowering how many points you get from that. You got to show me more in production. He does in year 3. He jumps up to a 79.87. That's a good jump to see. By the time we get to his final college score, and you can go look up his college stats, he explodes after that on a per game metric level and shoots up. And again, even though I hold a lot of that 79 against him, I don't give him a lot of points to keep from that. His production on a career level at that point shoots so high that he jumps all the way up to a 93.94 on the final college score. There's not many people that are above that by the time they left college. We're talking about Brock Bowers and we're talking about Mark Andrews, both guys that had great final college scores. I mean, we're talking about he had a higher college score than Sam Laporta. He had a higher college score than Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Kincaid, not Mark Andrews, I talked about him, Michael Mayer. Like, the model showed, hey, he's a name we need to know. And because he was drafted 55, he fell into the right group for more points and pushed his percentage up just a little bit more for his final NFL rookie grade, which has him as, again, second highest in my model by the time we get to the end of this. This is how this tracker works. And so it's really good that we see some growth from year 1 to year 2. If they play, that's fantastic. If they don't, remember, I don't hold it against them. From year 2 to year 3, we really want to see some growth, some improvement. If it's a dip, I need you to already really be a high level player to make up for it. But again, this is the type of tracker I'm going to have built for every position. And so we can always sort it out. We can shuffle it around. We can filter it different people. So if we want to say, hey, how does Colston Loveland compare to some of these guys? I could filter it, put it through some criteria each year, see how it looks. And we can kind of start weaning it out. Where does he probably project before he even gets to the NFL draft, right? What possible NFL rookie grades might he get? And so that's really helpful for us when we look at this big picture. And so, speaking of Loveland, why don't I end this off? Now I'm kind of running long. Let me just show you some of these top college players. I mean, if you're watching the video, and try getting as many of these relevant names in here as possible so the picture is a little smaller. So you may have to pause it. You may have to look in a little bit, just like when you're playing video games back as a kid. Maybe now if you're playing college football 25. And let's talk through some of these top names. So I just sorted it by the highest college career score that they had by the time they were in their final year. Obviously, Ben Secure, who I talked about, 93. Currently, it looks like his final college score is a 93 because he hasn't played yet. Is what it is. But again, highest upside currently is him. Carter Nelson's the next highest tight end. Benjamin Brahmer's the next highest vet who has some type of college experience. Notice Loveland is the second highest out of college vets with some experience. But there's a lot of these freshmen that have some, if not equal, potential. And Loveland, for his case, honestly, actually has slipped just a little bit. And I mean a little bit. Like, he started off as an 88. After 2 years, he's still an 87. So, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Like, this next year, his current score depends more on his career production as a whole. And so we really want to see, how does he look this year for Michigan? Does he step forward? Does he get held back by all the circumstances changing? I mean, the numbers could go either way here. Some other top dudes, again, we'll just focus more on the vets since I've already talked about the 2024 group. Some Justin Jolly, Arliss Boringham, Joey Schaffler that I was talking about earlier, Jack Velling, Daquan Wright, Oscar Delp. Notice Oscar Delp is way down this list. A lot of people take him early. So maybe keep that in mind. He's kind of slipped a lot. He's no longer that 89. He's fallen off a good bit. RJ Maryland, Brent Keithy. Keithy's a great example. Started off as a 29, but has multiple years stacked career-wise where his production keeps improving and he does well in these 5 metrics. He's pushed himself all the way up to 75. If he stays healthy in 2024, he still has some room for growth before we get to his final college score. But again, we'll see on that one. It's a little bit unique with him. After him, let's talk about some of these others. I mentioned Luke Haas. I'll skip down to him down here below Rondé Gadsden. He, again, started off as a 49, but has already jumped 6 points. Jumping that many points in his first year, even on a limited sample of 5 games, is rare for a tight end. So he is somebody I'm really okay with. Hey, I'll skip taking Loveland in the 6th. Let me go get Haas in the 8th through 10th of a C2C startup. Just make sure I backfill it with Brahmer, Justin Jolly. Just some dudes I know I can have there if I need some extra reassurance that, hey, his production still continues to climb. Haas could easily be working his way up much higher if he keeps stacking some good years moving forward. Lachey has kind of fallen off. So again, he might be someone that I'm okay skipping on because even though some circumstances were out of his control with his injury, the offense he's stuck in, he still hasn't stepped up and been the guy for a big sample size that's shown his stats match where he was as a recruit. But remember, he was an 85 as a recruit. There's some good potential there that maybe he can work his way back up. We'll see how that plays out. But again, things like that are really interesting to see. For tight ends, I feel like this was kind of a good summary of how my model looks for them. And again, noticing I don't stop where they are as high schoolers because I understand, like any other college football player, there's room for growth. There's room for improving their skills, making themselves look better. And so I really think this is inspirational in a way that, hey, we can find a way to even narrow down the hardest position probably to figure out which tight ends might be worth taking a shot on even before they play a college snap of football. Right. So right out of high school, who do I look at? When it comes to C2C, this is great information. When it comes to Devi, this might be worth looking at more as a watch list, unless you're just super convicted like I am that Christian Bentancur is going to be possibly just as good as Laporte and Hawkinson. And again, we'll see how that plays out. That's on me. On me personally, I'm willing to take that shot. But again, Devi, freshman tight ends, obviously, most of the time I'm not going to recommend it. The model agrees. Don't look into it that quickly, typically. And honestly, even Dynasty, right? Like there's a difference if we go back and I consider, hey, well, how does this look if I was to sit there and go, you know, the final rookie grades, right? Is Dolchich really worth taking that early in the draft? Is Michael Mayer that much better than Sam Laporta? Right. I know I'll flip through some slides there and I went the wrong direction. But even here, it shows us there could be some advantages just by paying attention to this type of information. So I appreciate everybody who's taking time to listen to this. I've really enjoyed getting to do these episodes. Think about getting someone on to maybe do a little tag team on some future episodes. But again, I will be sharing my other two models at some point soon. As the start of this new school year starts, it's going to take a second possibly to get the other two out. But there is so much potential here that we can get an edge before anybody else has even caught on to what's going on. Just by, again, paying attention to the recruiting, the high school stats, and the fantasy lens that we put this into. So, again, y'all are awesome. I'm going to stop here at this point. So, I appreciate all the support. Again, it's very welcome. I've loved getting to look at it like this as a passion. It's just phenomenal. Until next time, keep checking the stats, keep watching the film, and let's work together to find these future NFL legends